Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series. And in this one, I'm going to be covering my round 6 game in the Charlotte GM Invitational in January 2019. If you followed the first 5 rounds, I started with 4 draws and in the 5th round lost my first game. And I was looking to rebound with the white pieces. My opponent was Gauri Shankar. He's actually someone I know fairly well. He's a chess instructor out of Chicago and a pretty good player in his own right. He actually has, I think, 5 or 6 IM norms. You actually need 3 to be an international master, but he hasn't yet crossed the 2400 barrier, so he's still trying to get the rating to get there. But I'm very confident he will get there pretty soon because he's definitely talented and certainly deserves it. In any case, let's get to the game. So I played d4. Gauri played knight f6, knight f3, e6, e3. I knew Gauri personally, and I know he is very, very well prepared. You often see him preparing with his laptop actually right up until the round starts. And so I kind of just want to get off the beaten path really quickly. That was kind of my game plan. So e3 seems fairly innocuous, but I was hoping to just get a game. So b6 makes sense, just developing the bishop on the long diagonal. Bishop d3, bishop b7, castles, d5. Okay, so it might seem like it doesn't make a lot of sense for black to play d5, especially when the bishop just got to this diagonal. Oops, maybe I can draw that better. Yep, there we go. But there's actually some pretty decent logic to it, because the point is that black's going to try and follow up with c5 really quickly. So the idea is that black is kind of taking control of the center because I'm kind of not really playing I'm delaying c4. So the idea is like, okay, if white's not going to play c4, black's going to try and play c5 and get that advantage. So I played b3. Again, I wasn't trying to rush with c4. Black went bishop d6. And now I went c4. And the point of playing b3 and then c4 is that if black decides to take, this did not happen, white can take with the b pawn and establish a nice little center. The positions can be quite double-edged because ultimately black may wind up playing c5, and then I might have to contend with isolated pawns, or not isolated pawns, but hanging pawns in the center, this pawn duo, because there could be some scenario where, let's say black castles, this didn't happen, but let's say something like this arises. There could be a scenario where white has these 2 hanging pawns, as they're called, in the center. The reason they're called hanging pawns is because they're considered to be a little bit loose. Note that if you count the pawn islands, white actually has 3 pawn islands and black has 2. So as a consequence, the idea is in the short term, white's pawn hanging pawns in the center can be somewhat of an asset because they can facilitate an attack when these lines get opened up. But in the long term, they may actually be weaknesses. That's why they're called hanging pawns. In any case, this didn't happen, but I kind of didn't mind playing those hanging pawn positions. And that's what I was signaling with b3 before c4. So anyways, b3, c4, black castled, and I took on d5. The reason for this was I thought, okay, if black isn't going to take on d5, I might be able to, if black isn't going to take on c4, I might be able to inflict the same hanging pawns I was trying to get myself. So I kind of switched to positional mode. And so after c takes d5, e takes d5, which is the most natural capture, I went for bishop a3. And this was kind of my idea, was the point is I trade these bishops off in an ideal world. My knight would be on a3, but maybe it can go to b5 or relocate to c3 or maybe even back to d2. And then I was thinking, you know what? I would have the 2 pawn islands versus the 3. So, for instance, bishop takes a3, knight takes a3, c5. Now I might consider taking, or I might even play rook c1 and do something like this. Again, play against. Now, black would have hanging pawns. I'm playing against them. So whenever I want, I could try and take, or I could try and keep the tension and argue that I might have pressure against the d5 pawn. So it's all pawn structure game here. Now, the thing I'd overlooked with this bishop a3 move was actually what black played c5. c5 kind of did not cross my mind. I don't know why, but it actually makes a lot of sense. If I'm trying to go positional, why would black willingly help me make the exchanges I want? So very, very good move. And unfortunately, as much as I wanted to keep the tension on c5, I did not see a good way to do that because it just seemed very awkward. It seemed like black can improve very quickly with queen e7, knight bd7, rook e8, rook c8, and this tension I didn't really like for me. So, and then in some circumstances, I thought maybe black even has the c4 move, hitting my bishop with tempo. So I was really not pleased to see c5. I tried to continue with this plan anyway of pressuring the hanging pawns. I went d takes c5, b takes c5 was played. Note that bishop takes c5 is not ideal because now black would have this isolated pawn on d5 and my knight would get the d4 square to operate with. So b takes c5 does not give my knight that square. And then I went knight c3. And my thought process was, you know what? I'm going to go knight a4, I'm going to go rook c1, and I'm going to have 3 pieces pressuring that c5 pawn, and it's going to be hard to defend. That was my contention. Let's see what happens. So rook e8 was played. Good move, getting the rook to the half-open file. I was a little bit surprised that black didn't start with knight bd7 or queen e7, just because that protected the pawn, and I was clearly going to attack it. So I went rook c1. Again, getting the rook to the half-open file and then considering putting pressure on the c5 pawn in a moment. Knight bd7, developing move, good move. And now knight a4. And I have my desired 3 attackers on the c5 pawn. I feel like, you know what, like this is the best, this is all right, I should have some pressure. And also this bishop on d6 is a little bit loose. So even tactically, I was considering knight d4 as an option at some point. Queen e7 was played. I thought that was really clever. I actually was eyeing rook c8. But again, if rook c8, I might have knight d4 in some position. Maybe not here, but in some positions, knight d4 might be a move just because the bishop on d6 is a target. So queen e7 just kind of cuts that out. Now the bishop on d6 isn't hanging. And here within lies my problem is I have these 3 attackers, but the pawn is defended 3 times, and I didn't see an easy way to ramp up the pressure. And the issue is if I don't have pressure on the c5 pawn, now it's black that's going to have pressure on these diagonals. These diagonals are just going to be screaming for those bishops if black is ever able to open up the position with d4. So I was very, very concerned about this, and I was trying to figure out, where's my counterplay now? If I don't have this counterplay on the pawn, where's my counterplay? So I went for bishop b5, desperately trying to seek that out. The point was that now maybe this d7 knight is a bit of a problem at some point. Not here, but I was thinking maybe I'm getting some pressure on c5 indirectly by pressuring the knight like this. I don't know. That was my thought. And black played a6. Really good move, just saying, you know what? I dare you to take that knight. I'm just going to replace it with another one. So, I took just taking that challenge because I didn't want to admit my mistake and go backward. But after bishop takes d7 and now knight takes d7, the dust is settled a bit and black is just better, in my opinion. I mean, basically black has the 2 bishops, first of all. That's a huge asset, right? Second of all, black has this nice pawn duo in the center, and, these hanging pawns aren't really hanging. I mean, they're really well protected, which is a problem for me. And then lastly, my king, it doesn't look that way, but my king feels a little bit airy. The reason for that is, again, if this position opens up and d4 is played, I just have this knight supporting my king side. So it's very, very precarious position. And I was already concerned about black potentially going knight e5 and exchanging my knight. And then my king is bare. So I was very concerned. So I went rook e1, trying to I don't know, already think about, and it's a sad move to make, but I was already worried about this d4 push, so I at least thought, well, now it's impossible because my rook is unleashed against the queen. The other thing I thought was, in circumstances where this knight has to move and it gets traded, my king might be able to run in the event that there's a checkmating threat. But you could already see how desperate I was kind of thinking, because even envisioning king f1 at some point is a sad reality. Rook a c8, great move. Again, also signaling that black does not have to rush at all. The point is that now black has one more defender on the c5 pawn, and it wasn't necessary to do this, but it means that now black can free up one of the other pieces that was defending c5 and bring it towards the king side and attack. So, pretty good decision. Bishop b2. I conceded that, my bishop wasn't doing anything on that diagonal, so I maybe should correct it and, move it somewhere else. But again, you can see that I'm kind of floundering here, and it's not an opening success, I'll tell you that much. Queen e6. I think that's a pretty reasonable move. I also think now the queen has the ability to transfer to the king side, to g6, maybe to h5 ultimately. And again, watch out for this bishop on b7. I mean, if d4 gets played at some point, it could be a real problem for me. So I went h3, just kind of saying I don't know what to do, and I need to make a move, and it was just kind of a waiting move, just giving my king luft. Black played knight f6, and now the storm cloud is brewing. You could see black is slowly maneuvering the pieces towards the king side. I was concerned. I played knight c3, trying to bring my knight back into the game somehow. And actually, now you actually see the point of queen e6 to a certain extent, because if black played knight f6 right away, okay, I was thinking maybe c5 would be a bit of a problem, but maybe the pawn is defended regardless. Anyways, queen e6, h3, knight f6, knight c3. And now bishop b8, and I was like, whoa. Black has all the time in the world to do stuff, and I'm just desperately trying to trade pieces. I so badly want to exchange one of black's bishops, but I don't know how I'm going to do that. And these bishops are tucked away so nicely, so far away from me, so I can't actually harass them, and they just bear down on my king. I went knight d2, trying to just think about maybe e4. I can't even say. Maybe trying to transfer my queen. Not a great move. And now black went for d4. And d4 is really well timed here because my rook on e1 is not reinforced by the knight that just left the f3 square. So it's not like e takes d4 It's not like e takes d4 actually threatens the queen on e6 very much, because black could just consider taking. In any case, I did take, and now black played queen d6. Excellent move. And the point is that now there's this nasty checkmating threat, and both these bishops are just like lasers to my king. Very problematic. I really don't have many ways to deal with it. I played rook takes c8, trying to trade off one pair of rooks at least. But after rook takes c8, you can see my king is still in the doghouse here, and the mate in 2 is still threatened on h2. So I went knight f1 to cover that square. And then black went c takes d4, and I actually had to go knight a4 back. And this is a good place to just stop and just take stock of what's happened, because right now what's happened is that black actually has an extra pawn island, right? I have 2 pawn islands. Black has 3, because the d4 pawn is a bit of a target. But at the same time, the position is ripped open for the black bishops. And, the other problem is that all my knights are kind of in very passive positions. This knight a4 is not participating at all. This knight on f1 is strictly defensive. And it's hard to imagine this position being held, because, I'm able to defend one diagonal, the dark square diagonal right now, and stop the h2 mate. But if this queen on d6 gets a light square and threatens mate on g2, how do I defend that? So really big problem for me. And black just went queen d5, just switching tact right away, taking advantage of that. Because you could see now g2 is just as sensitive as h2 was. And this kind of forces a really ugly move, but I kind of have to do it, which is f3. Again, not a move you want to make, but I was trying to stop the checkmating threat. Yeah. So after f3, and I do wonder actually if queen f3 maybe was a better bailout. I can't imagine that this is a position that I should go for, but I don't know. Maybe it was okay. It was a better try at least to play this way with the queens off the board. Not that trading queens is forced. Black could move the queen back to d7, but just a consideration. Anyways, f3, and now d3. Very, very strong move, because now the point is I have 3 weakened diagonals. We can see the dark squares here are very weak, and that diagonal. We could see I tried to plug the light square diagonal with f3, but it's very weak. And now, but while playing f3, I weaken more dark squares, and now this diagonal is a problem. So just problems all around, and d3 takes advantage of that, while also bringing the pawn closer to the queening square and introducing ideas of rook e2. So very, very big problems. Another thing that's actually concerning is knight h5, knight f4. So really, really big problems. My only saving grace here is that black kind of messes it up somehow. And I did, in the back of my mind, think, okay, black doesn't have, black's back rank is potentially weak. So if black tries to bum rush me going forward but doesn't take care of the back rank, I might get an extra tempo somewhere that could be important. But these were, again, kind of like flailing, very hopeful thoughts. So after d3, I went king h1, just stepping out the way before a bishop a7 check could come. And now bishop a7 came anyway. And then I went bishop takes f6. I didn't want to wait for this knight to improve. I did not want to wait for the knight to go somewhere, and I thought, like, I need to try and relieve the congestion somehow, and this bishop is not served me particularly well, so I thought, okay, maybe at least I can rip open the position. This doesn't actually help my position, though, for a few reasons. Firstly, after this exchange, if we take stock, now the king actually has an escape square. I was talking about this back rank problem. That back rank problem doesn't exist any longer. Furthermore, yeah, these are double pawns. Black has double pawns in the f-file, but look at how pathetic my knights are compared to these bishops. It's just night and day, night and day. So that coupled with the rook infiltrating, it's just a gone position. So probably could have maybe not traded that bishop, but hey, I'm trying to play hope chess at this point. So I played rook c4. That was actually my idea with bishop takes f6, was to try and activate my rook along the 4th rank and essentially just cause confusion. I mean, that's kind of the best I can do in this circumstance, is confuse in some way. The other thing with rook c4 was to actually just stop queen d4, because now that I gave up the bishop on b2, that square was a problem, and I was worried about queen g1 checkmate, believe it or not. So rook c4 at least stops the queen from getting to the dark square diagonal for now. h5 was played, stopping rook g4. I'm not so sure that was necessary, but it's not a bad move. It did allow me to go knight c3, though, and I thought knight c3 was very nice. I mean, the point is that now I wanted to go knight c3 the move before, but again, I couldn't do that because of the queen d4 threat. Now my rook is in a semi-active position, and at least now my knight tries to come back into the game. So I thought, okay, maybe I might have some type of chance. Queen d6, just moved it away. And then I went knight e4, getting another tempo, and I was like, okay, my knight is, went on a little journey the past few moves. I'm now eyeing the king side. This is progress. Black played bishop takes e4, trading that knight, which is a very good decision, prudent decision in my opinion. And I think the thing that's also pretty, smart about it is when you have the two bishops, sometimes the benefit of it is that you just get to trade it for an annoying piece. So I think that's kind of what Black was doing here, was trading their bishop and still having another bishop in reserve for my most active piece. So I played f takes e4, and then Black went f5. And this move, I must say, I actually kind of missed. I wasn't sure how strong it was, but it seemed scary that after e takes f5, this rook would be screaming down the e-file again. And I kind of was pinning my hopes on the fact that the e-file was blocked now after f takes e4. I played e5, trying to kind of argue that, this made some sense, because the other issue was that if e takes f5, in some lines I had to actually worry about bishop b8. I'm not so sure if it would have been the biggest problem here, but it was something I had to worry about. So there were just a lot of factors here that gave me a lot of cause for concern. I played e5 because I thought, okay, at least I'm getting a tempo on the queen, and maybe I'm distracting it from the d3 pawn. So if the queen takes, I could take on d3. Additionally, if the rook took, I thought, okay, maybe I have rook c8 at some point. I'm also eyeing h5. Maybe I have some counterplay. So queen e6 was played ignoring my e5 move, and I thought that was really smart because it reinforced the idea of this queen g1 mate. And very, very good moves. Very, very good move, especially in Gauri's time trouble. I was playing very quickly, trying to take advantage of his time, because that was pretty much the only advantage I had in the position. But queen b6 I thought was a good move, not falling for my deflection. I have to deal with a threat, so I went knight d2, pairing the g1 threat. Note, I'd love for my knight to get to a more active post, like, I don't know, like g3 or something, but it just didn't feel like a good move. I mean, rook takes e5 is coming, and it just seemed hard to imagine that I could keep the blockade on the d pawn and guard the g1 mate. Important to note too that there are positions where my dark squares are so weak that even if I win the d3 pawn, there's a rook e1 check. So that was also something I had to worry about. So I went knight d2, queen e3 was played, and then I went knight f3, and I thought this was holding it down a little bit because now my knight guards the g1 square, it also guards the e5 pawn, and it keeps an eye on the d2 square, which is where the d pawn may want to go. So my knight was like doing an overtime shift here, and I thought, okay, I've kind of stabilized. Hope for the best. Trade queens and see what happens. Black played rook d8, just protecting the d4 pawn, or d3 pawn. And now I went rook c1 because I got really, really concerned. Initially, my concern was if Black plays d2 next, what am I to do? I'm totally tied down. Queen e1 check is a threat if my knight or my d1 queen ever vacate the e1 square. And so I thought I was in trouble. So I went rook c1 to try and, cover the back rank a little bit. And now queen e2 was played. And again, I think it just highlights the strength of the d-pawn here because essentially, I can't really take because if I take, Black takes, and then rook d1 is coming down. So again, it just shows you the strength of like a passed pawn and just how weak my back rank is. I went for king h2, which was maybe not the best. I was also thinking about queen d2, but unfortunately bishop e3 hits me. But this line, I was thinking maybe queen takes d2, d takes rook e1. But after rook d1, again, my pieces are so tied down, it's tough to imagine this is holdable. Note that if I go g3, then there's just bishop f2. And again, the rook is hit too many times, and I'm going to lose. So king h2, queen takes a2, and now queen e1. And I thought now I maybe had managed to get some counterplay because essentially this a2 pawn was not really of consequence. I thought, why take that pawn? You want to focus here. And now I thought, ooh, maybe my queen can come in and get some type of perpetual. Black played bishop f2, though, stopping me from getting in there. And now I went queen b4, and I thought, oh, now my queen has a new way to potentially get into the position. Black played d2. I played rook d1. And all of a sudden I thought, you know what? This is probably the best position I've had in a while because my rook, my knight, and the queen are eyeing this pawn. And my queen might eye e7. So I thought, this is all right. Black played bishop e3 to defend. And I went queen h4, shifting gears that way, eyeing the rook on d8, eyeing the h5 pawn. And on a really good day, I was thinking maybe I get queen h5 and knight g5 on a really good day. Black played rook d3, moving the rook off of the 8th rank. And I thought this was kind of a strange move because I thought now, if you just imagine that this bishop wasn't guarding the g5 square, I thought maybe I'd get some type of perpetual. So I went queen h5 check, dreaming of such a perpetual, thinking, you know what, maybe I get knight g5, maybe I attack the s7 pawn, who knows. Black played bishop f4 check, and I went king h1, coming to the back rank. g3 could have been considered. It seemed very, very strange to weaken the second rank like this, but g3 might have been a move worth considering. I went king h1, and after queen takes b3, you see the problem here is with my king in h1, the queen takes on d1 with check, which is kind of problematic. If my king is on h2, I might have been able to get away with knight g5 anyway. But king h1, queen takes b3, and yeah, it's tough. I went knight g1, a step in the wrong direction, trying to protect this rook with my queen, but I mean, it doesn't look pretty because now my knight is in the most passive position, my king is in jail, and my queen can't make a perpetual like this because the bishops and the pawn are guarding those squares. Rook d4 is played. I guess I'm not sure why rook d4 is played. I guess it protects the bishop, and maybe in some lines the queen. This is why the queen could come to g3 and threaten queen h2 mate. So actually not as subtle as I thought. Keep in mind this game was played a long time ago, relatively speaking. So I don't remember all of the little ideas. I played e6, trying to again distract the queen from this g3 square, but after queen takes e6, black just takes yet another pawn and is 2 pawns up. All my pieces are passive except my queen, and I have no checkmates or let alone even checks to speak of, so really nasty position. I went knight e2, trying to attack the rook and bishop, but after queen e3, excellent move, just says, you know what, you can't even take either piece. Because if I take on d4, there's queen e1 check, and again, we see these same mating themes where my dark squares are so porous that even giving up the queen temporarily is sufficient. So I can't do anything here. All my pieces are paralyzed. My queen is tied to the knight. My knight can't capture the rook. My bishop can't move because of the queen. So d1 queen. So it's just really problematic. I went g3 now because I thought, I pretty much have no moves, so I was like, all right, I'll make this move, just see what happens. Bishop takes g3 was played, totally fine. And after knight takes g3, queen takes g3 was played. And even here, I've managed to, quote-unquote, trade some material, but it doesn't matter. The d2 pawn is so strong. My rook on d1, again, is in jail, and there's just nothing going here. I went queen takes f5, just taking a pawn. And now queen e1 check, excellent move. Essentially just pretty much ending the game or ending any type of dreams of counterplay, because again, taking here just means that black queens again and is up a rook. I went king d2. I went king g2 just to kind of, again, entertain the idea of perpetual check. But even here, if your queen takes d1, I run out of checks very quickly. Note I can't go queen d8, so it'd have to be queen h6. And yeah, this is just not. I mean, the checks will run out. My opponent actually did not even want to deal with running around with the perpetual checks. And after king g2, he actually just went queen e2 check. Because now if I go back down to the first rank, he takes my queen, he takes my rook with check. So I have to step up. And after king g3, now he went rook d3 check, and I have to step up yet again. And now rook d4 check, king g3. And he said, you know what, I've had enough here. I'm just going to go queen d3 check. Again, he was in heavy time trouble, so making moves on increments. So in this situation, he wasn't sure of whether I had cheap tricks or not. And he was like, this is an easy rook endgame I can win in my sleep. I'm going to just go for this. Because if I take here on d3, move my king, the black rook can just head back to d8. Actually, excuse me, even in this position, actually, black can actually play rook takes h3, and now I still can't take on d2 because of rook h2 check. So I can't even get to a reasonable. I can't begin to fight this endgame at all. And so in any case, I saw that, and after queen d3 check, I actually just resigned because I saw I was 2 pawns down. There's no way I should be able to recover this one. And even if, let's say, even if rook takes h3 wasn't a move, we didn't see that, you can just push the a pawn. Because in a scenario like this, if I try to win the d pawn, my king will be so far away from the action that even an endgame like this is just totally lost. And this pawn just runs up the board. So it is what it is. I lost this game and was, unfortunately not pleased with the way it went from beginning to end. I got no advantage at all. But it was actually a really good lesson for me as well, because I thought just playing against the hanging pawns would be relatively easy and it'd be easy to target the c5 pawn. But it turned out it wasn't really the case. And so I think it gave me a little bit more respect for the hanging pawn's position and the resiliency of it. And that was something to just keep in mind for future experiences. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, please do so in the description below. Thanks. Have a good one.